On today's episode, I'll share my thoughts on the Blackhawks' changes to development camp this summer, and I'll also go over defenseman Ian Mitchell's season recap segment. All that and plenty more right here on Locked On Blackhawks.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? Welcome on in to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today is Tuesday, May 23rd. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me out on Twitter at JackBushman2, or you could also go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And real quick, just a reminder that you could subscribe or follow along for free on YouTube and wherever you may be listening to your podcast. Make sure to go and do that real quick so that you can get the latest episode as soon as it's available each and every day. I also want to let you know that today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Make sure to go and download the Game Time app right now to get the cheapest tickets for all the sports, music, and theater events near you. All right, good morning, everyone. As always, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Thank you all for making the show your very first listen here to start off your day. Unfortunately, Blackhawks fans, segment one here does not involve the best news, as yesterday, Blackhawks assistant general manager is Jeff Greenberg. Assistant general manager Mark Eaton jumped on the Blackhawks Talk podcast with Charlie Roumeliotis, recurring guest here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, and he made an announcement regarding Blackhawks development camp, which is always one of my favorite times of the summer. It's actually something I've been going to since way back in 2019, really when I first started kind of covering the Blackhawks and doing what I do now. And it's actually how I built a lot of relationships with Blackhawks beat writers and just a lot of different people involved in the Blackhawks media side of the world. And just been a lot of fun watching, certain players grow throughout the years and getting an opportunity to get a first glance at some of these kids at 18, 19 years of age, and then go on to watch them develop and grow throughout the entire process. It's a lot of fun. But unfortunately, Mark Eaton announced on the Blackhawks Talk podcast yesterday. By the way, if you want to go check out that full interview, Eaton does share some awesome insight and talks about the Blackhawks mentality and the draft process and everything involved in the summer. Make sure to go and check that out if you want to hear more from Mark Eaton. But one of the key things, probably the key thing that he mentioned in that interview, is the changes that the Blackhawks are going to be making to their development camp here this summer, which, by the way, is set to be held from Friday, June 30th to Thursday, July 6th, which, is kind of a crazy time period for the hockey world. It's only 2 days following the 2023 NHL draft and would take place during the midst of free agency. So it always has been a little bit of a chaotic time period for me personally, also as a golf fan. The Open Championship has landed during that week as well. So it's been madness. And I understand kind of if that led to some of these changes, but the big news that Mark Eaton announced, by the way, was that the Blackhawks will not be holding any on-ice activities during their development camp this summer. Everything will be held off the ice, and they'll be focusing more on the strength and physical side of things with these prospects this time around. And it's kind of frustrating to hear that. I'll talk in a second about, why I do understand this decision from the Blackhawks organization's perspective. But as a fan, the fan in me is really upset that the Blackhawks aren't going to be having their prospects doing on-ice activities for a week here in the summer, because as I referenced, it's a fun opportunity to get a first look at a lot of these kids fresh off getting drafted by the Chicago Blackhawks and, seeing Lucas Reichel over the years, and obviously Kevin Korchinski last year, and Frank Nazar. And there's been a slew of guys over the years that it's been exciting to see and watch along, the entire process as I referenced. And to not be able to get to see any of them this summer, it is kind of a low blow. It's always a fun time to kind of interact with some Blackhawks fans too, and especially with the Blackhawks going to be picking Connor Bedard with the number one overall pick come day one of the NHL draft. That would be that first opportunity to see Connor Bedard wearing a Blackhawk sweater, albeit a practice uniform. But a first chance for a lot of people to go and see him for the first time. And Fifth Third Arena down in Chicago would be absolutely rowdy with Bedard on hand, as well as a slew of prospects that the Blackhawks have accumulated over the last couple of years. Obviously, they're going to be having several picks. They might be trading some of them, but still going to be making a lot of selections, it seems, in the 2023 NHL draft to only add to their prospect pool. So to not be able to get to see them this summer, and now we have to wait until training camp in the fall, or I think there will actually still be a prospect showcase, the Tom Curvers prospect showcase this year. It will be held up in Minnesota, though, I believe. So I guess that'll be kind of the first opportunity for some of these prospects to get on the ice and showcase their stuff there. But yeah, it's sad that we're going to have to wait until probably September for that to happen, as opposed to, just a couple of days after the NHL draft. But the reasoning behind this kind of decision from the Blackhawks organization, Mark Eaton went on to explain in his interview a couple of days ago. Not only was it, just kind of the chaotic time period and everything that's going on, that probably wasn't the main thing whatsoever. It probably didn't help. But Eaton also mentioned how, with the prospects being mostly, if you're a prospect still at this level coming into the summer, you're probably not at the professional level as of yet. And the biggest thing that Eaton said he'd be writing down when he's filling out scouting reports and kind of keeping tabs on all these players and seeing what they need to work on, where they need to grow, what are the things they need to get better at. A lot of the time, most of the time, he referenced, the main thing that he's writing down is they need to get stronger. They need the ability to condition themselves to play at the highest level for a 60-minute game and to be able to keep up with that pace. That's the biggest thing that these kids need at this point in time in their development process. And he thinks that the Blackhawks organization, he's been doing this for 10 years. And just after kind of doing this for so long and knowing this is the biggest thing that these kids need to work on, he kind of wanted to make sure there was more of an emphasis on the physical side of things moving forward. And he also referenced how kind of the timing of the development camp in the middle of the summer really doesn't work well with what a lot of these prospects do in terms of their summer regimen. Like, aside from some of the Seattle Thunderbirds players, which we'll get to here in just a second for segment 2, most of the players in the Blackhawks organization have had their seasons be over for quite a while now. And this is usually the time where they're off the ice, kind of relaxing and letting their body recover and getting right physically in order to start getting back into the swing of things at a proper clip when that time comes in the summer. So June is usually a month that a lot of these players have off, and then to kind of just throw them back into the swing of things on ice late in June, especially when, these kids are aware, especially if you were, just drafted, it's a development camp, but it's going to be important. It's going to be covered by the media. The fans are going to be there, and you want to have a good showing, and you want to leave your new organization with a lasting impression, right? So some of them, tend to over cram for the development camp, and it kind of throws off their whole regime for the entire summer. And Eaton talked about how they kind of wanted to remove that stress and pressure and take that out of these prospects' hands by doing only off-ice activities. It kind of just fits in better with the schedule of the offseason for most of these players. So all in all, it does sound like it's a smart decision from the Blackhawks organization here. I think in terms of what's best for the prospects, Mark Eaton and the Blackhawks development team certainly would know better than I or us fans do. So this is probably the right way to go about it. And look, they're still going to have plenty of opportunities at training camp in the fall during the Tom Curvers prospect showcase against the Minnesota Wild. They're going to have plenty of opportunities to display their skills on the ice, and they're going to do it after a full summer of training. And now, coming into the Blackhawks facility and getting an understanding of what it's like to train as a professional. That's another thing that Mark Eaton really talked about and what they're going to be doing with this week instead of being on the ice. Not only are they going to be obviously lifting weights and working on the physical side of things, but he also wants to show them, kind of what it's like to be a professional, get them acclimated to the lifestyle at this level, kind of show them how they train up at the NHL, show them what their recommended off-season regimens are and everything that goes along with that. So it sounds like it's a good kind of learning process for a lot of these kids who are, probably coming off of highs, being immediately drafted by an NHL club, and they kind of get sat down, and rather than kind of stressing and worrying about looking good on the ice, they can come in and learn about how to get stronger and take care of business off of it. So, well, it's, kind of a pain in the butt and stinks that we're not going to be able to see Connor Bedard on the ice for the Blackhawks this summer at Fifth Third Arena, along with a handful of prospects. I do understand the fan in me is hurt. The fan in me is truly hurt, but it probably is the right decision for a lot of these young kids. And we'll see how it kind of works along the development process. Look, I mean, what the Blackhawks did for quite a while obviously didn't work. They didn't have too many prospects coming up from Rockford and making an impact at the NHL level after being drafted. Kyle Davidson obviously wants that to change throughout this rebuilding process. So we'll see if this has any impact whatsoever. I'm a little disappointed, no doubt about it, but at the end of the day, I can't really argue with the decision here by Mark Eaton and the Blackhawks organization after hearing what he had to say recently on the Blackhawks Talk podcast. All right, Hawks fans, coming up in just a moment here, I'll be moving on to provide a quick update on 3 Blackhawks prospects that have advanced to the Memorial Cup. But first, I need to talk to you all about Game Time, which is the perfect place for last-minute ticket deals. And buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And I personally have used Game Time for probably close to 10 years now. I used it back in high school when I would actually go to Blackhawks games with some of my buddies. I always use Game Time whenever I'm trying to find cheap tickets to go to a baseball game near me. And I always love how they send me pictures of my seats and provide event cancellation protection. So make sure to go and download the Game Time app right now, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps for $20 off on your first purchase. Again, all you have to do is create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed, Game Time. All right, we're back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast. Real quick, before I get into segment 2, I do want to let some of you know, all of you know actually, about the awesome stuff that I have planned for Locked On Blackhawks here in the coming weeks. And for those of you who are new listeners here to the show, let me just say welcome. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast, or if you're listening to this for the first time, make sure you follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Wherever you get your podcast, it's 100% for free. And you're going to want to be sticking along because some good stuff's coming up here on the show in the next couple of weeks. Obviously, I've already gotten into my season recap segments. I'm actually going to be wrapping those up here sometime soon. I've only got a few more players to go through. I've also begun getting into my 2023 NHL draft profiles, as I've already broken down forwards Andrew Crystal and Colby Barlow. Make sure to go and check out the YouTube channel to see my breakdown on those 2 high-end prospects. I'm also going to be kicking off my end of the season top 10 prospect rankings here sometime soon. I'm planning to have Joe Brand from WGN on the show, possibly sometime in the next couple of days for an off-season chat on all things Blackhawks. And I'm also trying to get someone who's involved with the Regina Pats from the WHL to come on to talk some more Connor Bedard. And in the following weeks, as free agency starts to get closer, I'll look at some potential fits for the Blackhawks to bring in here in the offseason. So a lot of good stuff coming up here on Locked On Blackhawks. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel to stay all caught up on that. All right, segment 2 here. Over the weekend, the absolute wagon that is the Seattle Thunderbirds, along with Blackhawks prospects, got something in my eye here real quick, along with Blackhawks prospects Kevin Korchinski, Nolan Allan, and Colton Dach, won the WHL Championship as they defeated the Winnipeg Ice 3-1 in Game 5 and have now secured their spot in the 2023 Memorial Cup. Quick congratulations to those three Blackhawks prospects, along with everyone on the Seattle Thunderbirds. Just felt like a team that was destined for greatness the entire time. They made several moves at the deadline, bringing in Colton Dach, bringing in Nolan Allan, bringing in Dylan Guenther. They got Brad Lambert. This team is just absolutely loaded top to bottom. And all my time doing this podcast and kind of being a media person for the Blackhawks, I don't think I've seen a junior team as loaded as these Seattle Thunderbirds. And that's saying something because the Edmonton Oil Kings last year were an absolute wagon as well. And I think these Seattle Thunderbirds would absolutely take it to them. I mean, they only had 3 losses in the entire WHL playoffs. As I mentioned, they bested the Winnipeg Ice, who had a talented roster as well with Matthew Savoy, Zach Benson, who's one of the top prospects in the 2023 draft. They absolutely dusted them, beating them 4-1 in 5 games. They also bested the Kamloops Blazers, another one of the best rosters in the entire CHL in 6 games during the WHL's Western Conference Championships. It was an absolute juggernaut of a squad, to put it simply. And those Blackhawks prospects, all 3 of them, played a pretty big part in the Thunderbirds' success throughout the WHL postseason. Both Kevin Korchinski and Colton Dach wound up tallying 14 points in 19 games, 3 goals and 11 assists. Honestly, I probably would have liked to see Kevin Korchinski be a little bit more effective. He probably should have been out producing Colton Dach, but still not a bad postseason whatsoever for Kevin Korchinski. He was a very big staple of the Thunderbirds' man advantage. Obviously, a very gifted puck-moving and offensive defenseman. Good to see Colton Dach as well back and healthy and providing a spark for this Thunderbirds team after all he had to go through this year, like 3 separate injuries, had a couple of concussions, one back during the Tom Curvers Prospect Showcase last summer. I believe he dealt with one when he was still part of the Kelowna Rockets. He obviously had that shoulder wrist injury occur at the World Juniors. It was a tough up and down season for Colton Dach, but happy to see him end it with the WHL trophy. I don't know the name of it off the top of my head, but the WHL trophy over his head is he is a WHL champion. Hopefully he can kind of build off that momentum and have himself a good summer, as he's likely to make the jump to the professional level. Nolan Allan also had a really impactful playoff for the Thunderbirds, playing on their second defensive pairing. Not only did he tally an impressive 10 points in 19 games, 2 goals and 8 assists, and all in all, his offense, it kind of got certainly influenced by the Thunderbirds having such a good team. But even when he was still part of the Prince Albert Raiders, yes. Took me a second to remember what team he was. But even before he got dealt to Seattle, he was doing a little bit better offensively than we had seen in past seasons, and was very solid defensively throughout the playoffs here for the Thunderbirds. Was a plus 22 in his 19 postseason games. And not everyone on the Thunderbirds had that solid of a plus minus. I think Kevin Korchinski was a plus 10. So for Nolan Allan to be a plus 22 as a defensive-minded defenseman, undoubtedly impressive. And like Colton Dach, we can probably expect him to make the jump to the professional level and will be with the Rockford IceHogs, if I had to guess, for the start of next season. But with the Thunderbirds, of course, winning the WHL Championship, one last congratulations to those 3. They have officially advanced to the 2023 Memorial Cup, along with the Peterborough Petes from the OHL, the Quebec Remparts from the QMJHL, who actually have NHL legend Patrick Waugh as their head coach, and he's starting to get some buzz around his name for his solid work here in the Q. And then the host team, funny enough, is none other than the Kamloops Blazers from the WHL. Those are the 4 teams involved in the 2023 Memorial Cup, and the Kamloops Blazers, as I referenced earlier, were responsible for 2 of the 3 Thunderbirds losses throughout the WHL postseason. So that should make for an intriguing storyline throughout the Memorial Cup. That kicks off, by the way, this Friday night. The Thunderbirds will actually have to wait, though, until Saturday for their tournament to get underway, as their first game will be against the Peterborough Petes on Saturday afternoon, and then they'll have to wait until Monday night to take on the Quebec Remparts. This is a round-robin style tournament for those who are unaware. And by the way, it is going to be televised on the United States on the NHL Network for those of you who have it on cable television. So if you have it, I highly recommend checking in to watch, not only one of the most exciting juggernaut teams in the entire CHL, but also you get an opportunity to watch three of the Blackhawks' top prospects in their organization, and Kevin Korchinski, Colton Dach, and Nolan Allan. All right, coming up in just a moment, Hawks fans, I still have to get into defenseman Ian Mitchell's season recap segment. All right, before I wrap up today's show, folks, it's time to get into my next Chicago Blackhawks season recap segment. I've been doing these for a couple of weeks now, so it's probably not a secret to any of my listeners out there. I'm actually getting towards the final few season recaps that I'll be doing here this summer. Once those wrap up, I'll probably start doing my end of the season top 10 prospects list a little more. I might even start that this Thursday or Friday, kind of depending on how everything shakes out. But for those of you who want to get all caught up on my season recap segments, you can easily do so by going and checking out the YouTube channel while you're there. Make sure to hit that subscribe button for me. Thank you very much. And you can easily go and click on the playlist tab at the top. You'll see my 2022-2023 season recaps playlist. You can click there, and on each and every video, I have everything time-coded in the description. You can easily bounce around and get all caught up on my Blackhawks season recaps. Up next, though, we have none other than 24-year-old defenseman Ian Mitchell, who had himself, I'm sure, a very frustrating season after 2 years ago was kind of rushed along to the NHL when Stan Bowman was still in charge, was really hyped up around the organization and everything that he did with Denver. It felt like, the expectations for Mitchell were kind of blown out of proportion a little bit unfairly. And I think that's just kind of the time period we're in as Blackhawks fans. And we just got a little bit ahead of ourselves with Ian Mitchell, and so did the Blackhawks organization. They undoubtedly rushed him to the NHL. He wasn't ready to play consistently at the NHL level during the COVID-shortened 2021 season, and as a result of his struggles and just clearly not being physical mature enough to handle that level, the Blackhawks left him down with the Rockford IceHogs for the majority of last season, especially when Kyle Davidson came in as the temporary general manager and then got that interim tag removed off of his name and became the full-time GM for the Chicago Blackhawks. There was obviously that newfound emphasis on the entire development process and starting over in this rebuild and really being patient with the Rockford IceHogs and the players they have down there. And that led to Mitchell only playing 8 NHL games with the Blackhawks last season. But it was probably for the best, undoubtedly for the best, even though, as I'll get to in a second, things didn't go all that well for him this year. He did kind of have a little bit of a resurgence, and I thought it was much needed to add some confidence to his game, playing a top pairing role consistently for the Rockford IceHogs along with Isaac Phillips. And those two were a big part of that team's success. Despite being the fourth youngest roster in the entire AHL, the IceHogs wind up qualifying for the Calder Cup playoffs. They win their play-in series against the Texas Stars. They definitely had some momentum, and Mitchell was a big part of that, a staple of the back end for the IceHogs. And as a result of him having a very positive season with the IceHogs, it felt like going into this year, it was going to be another big opportunity for him to kind of cement himself as a full-time NHLer. And just right off the bat, it became very clear that the Blackhawks, Kyle Davidson, and this new regime didn't think as highly of Ian Mitchell as the previous one did. He only played in, I believe, 7 games until the calendar shifted to 2023. Did not get an opportunity with this club right out of the gate. And with Luke Richardson, he was basically the odd man out, the seventh defenseman, more times than not for the entirety of the first half of the season. And as a result of that, even when he did get in the lineup, it never felt like he could find his groove. I'm sure he was struggling to play with confidence, and he even voiced his frustrations to the media about being healthy scratched and really didn't understand it. And I didn't really at the time either. And I still really don't, but it was just clear that the Blackhawks already had their minds made up about Ian Mitchell going into this season. I personally would have given him a little bit of a greater opportunity, but at the same time, he was part of the previous regime's prospect pool, and Davidson's, added a lot of defensemen to the organization, and there's a lot more that are coming up through the pipelines these next couple of years. So it was just kind of tough to see exactly where he was going to fit in. He did get, more of an opportunity in the second half after the Blackhawks traded Jake McCabe and they traded Jack Johnson and Jared Tenorti got hurt. There was, kind of a need for Ian Mitchell to be in the lineup. But other than that, it was clear the Blackhawks kind of are done and have kind of thrown Ian Mitchell to the back burner at this point. And it's a little bit frustrating, but I do get it because, he never really just flashed anything at the NHL level that made him special. He was never a consistent point producer. He was never a swift enough puck mover or good enough offensively to kind of get away with the issues that he has on the defensive side of things. So he didn't do himself any favors. I also don't think the Blackhawks did him any favors by rushing him along and also kind of not really using him consistently at all this season. And as a result, he didn't really put up any good numbers getting into it here. Mitchell wound up playing in 35 of the 82 games for the Blackhawks this year. That's, he only played 8 the year prior, but it's 4 less than he had as a rookie during the 56-game shortened COVID 2021 season. And then he only tallied 1 goal this year, did add a career-high 7 assists in those 35 games for a career-high 8 points, although it was only 1 more than he had as a rookie. So, as I mentioned, it wasn't beneficial enough. He wasn't impactful enough to kind of make up for the flaws and the deficiencies that he has on the defensive side of things. He only did accrue 8 penalty minutes. He never really has had an issue with getting into the penalty box, but at that same time, I do wonder if that's because the tenacity and the aggressiveness for Mitchell, that's not really his style defensively, and he's not known for that side of the game. So I do wonder if his inability to kind of play with a rugged edge or a chip on his shoulder leads to him not being all that aggressive defensively, and he also doesn't take that many penalties. He also didn't play that big of a defensive role. Another thing that kind of stood out to me, and this is something that Charlie Roumeliotis mentioned to me as well, Mitchell didn't have a role for the Blackhawks power play, not only this season, but really never at the NHL level. No power play goals this season. And while he could have been sent down to the Rockford Ice Hogs to kind of give them a little bit more of a veteran boost on the blue line, they elected not to for the Calder Cup playoffs. And instead, they let Alex Vlasic kind of man the power play duties, at least for the most part down there, giving Alex Vlasic, not really an offensive-minded guy, that opportunity over Ian Mitchell not even being down there, and Alec Regula probably doesn't bode well for either of those guys. But I thought it was pretty significant for Mitchell that even when he did get in the lineup, he really wasn't getting power play minutes. And as a puck-moving defenseman, that's what he's known for. To not give that opportunity, I think, really does signify that the Blackhawks are going to be moving on from him here this offseason. He did average 15 minutes and 50 seconds of time on ice. That was up from the 11:56 he averaged the year before. So did take on a little bit more of a meaningful role when he did get an opportunity. In terms of some of the block shots and hits numbers, nothing really all that impressive here. 37 block shots in 35 games, decent numbers. Only 16 hits, though, in his 35 games. He's just not a physical defenseman, not physical in any way, really, in any part of his game. And then in terms of the analytics, 42.5 Corsi for percentage. Although I was a little surprised by this, Mitchell was on the ice for 21 goals for to only 27 against in all situations this year, which, for a guy, he didn't play any penalty kill time, but at 5-on-5, for him to only be a -6, it is a little bit better than I expected. To be fair, though, as I referenced, he had a 60% offensive zone start time, so did play an offensive role and got a lot of opportunities in the offensive zone for the Blackhawks this year. But again, didn't really do enough to make up for what he lacks. That's a physicality in the defensive zone, the size. He's not a big defenseman, and it's not like his speed or his puck moving or his play in transition stands out. I would say Caleb Jones in all of those areas is a much better defenseman and is much more willing of getting a 1-year contract and the Blackhawks taking a risk on him next season. So Mitchell put up some okay numbers, and I'd give him the benefit of the doubt because he kind of got the short end of the stick this year and never had a consistent role, never had a consistent spot in the lineup, would kind of get thrown in there and be expected to do good. And that's never the easiest thing to do, especially as a 23, 24-year-old who's dealing with some consistency or some confidence problems, I should say. So I give Mitchell the benefit of the doubt, but he didn't really leave us with anything to want to give him another opportunity for. He didn't really prove all that much in this stint with the Blackhawks this year. So that's why I expect them to move on this offseason. And all in all, I'm going to wind up giving him a C- for his performance this season. Kind of on the same page as most of you listeners out there. 68% of the voters on YouTube said he deserved a C. 51% on Twitter said he deserved a C, while 43% of the voters on Twitter said he deserved a D or an F. I was pretty close. The only reason I didn't was because I thought he had kind of a tough draw and didn't get the best slate or opportunity from the Blackhawks this year, but it was undoubtedly not impressive. I think we all kind of feel the same way about Ian Mitchell. He's deserving of another opportunity elsewhere, and it's probably best for both parties to move on here in the offseason. All right, folks, I think that's going to wrap up Tuesday, May 23rd's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for tuning into the show, and make sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free right now, wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. And that way you can get the latest episode as soon as it comes out each and every day. Once again, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me out on Twitter at Jack Bushman2, or you can check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until tomorrow's episode, that's going to do it here for the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.